I didn't realize how much work travel had become until I finished a trip where nothing went wrong. That's the part that surprised me. No missed flights, no cancellations, no dramatic delays. The itinerary worked exactly as planned. And yet, by the time I got home, I felt wrung out in a way that didn't make sense. Not physically tired, mentally spent. Like I'd been on for hours longer than I should have been. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it was just a long day, or that airports were louder than usual, or that I was out of practice. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about the trip. It was about everything surrounding it. Welcome to Passport Pointers, where we talk about the parts of travel that aren't broken, but still feel heavier than they used to. And today I want to talk about the moment I realized that modern travel isn't just transportation anymore. It's a job you're quietly expected to perform. The strange thing is, no one ever assigns you this job. There's no training, no orientation, no moment where someone explains that you're now responsible for managing half the system yourself. It just happens quietly, without permission or warning. It starts before you even leave home. Booking a trip used to feel like choosing a flight. Now it feels like negotiating a contract. You're not just picking a time and a price, you're deciding how much flexibility you're allowed later, how much risk you're willing to absorb, and how many decisions you're comfortable postponing until conditions are worse. You read fare rules that didn't exist before. You compare seat maps like they're strategy boards. You evaluate baggage policies, change penalties, and whether paying now is smarter than gambling later. None of it feels dramatic in isolation. But by the time you finish booking, you've already made a dozen small decisions. You've shifted roles without realizing it. You're no longer just a passenger. You're already operating the trip. Then comes the preparation phase, which used to be mostly about packing. Now it's about verification. You check documents, you check apps, you check rules that may have changed since the last time you flew, even if that was only a few months ago. You confirm baggage allowances, boarding requirements, and whether your ticket actually includes the things you assumed it would. You're not just deciding what to bring, you're making sure nothing about the process will surprise you later. Because surprise now comes with penalties, fees, delays, lost options. Discovering the wrong rule at the wrong moment can derail the entire day. This doesn't feel like work in the traditional sense. You're sitting at home, maybe on the couch, maybe with a cup of coffee, but mentally, you're on duty. You're double-checking because the system expects you to. You're responsible for catching errors before they matter. You're not packing anymore, you're auditing. And once your brain understands that responsibility has shifted, it never fully relaxes again. The day of travel is where it really hits. You arrive at the airport and almost immediately slip into monitoring mode, whether you mean to or not. You're watching departure boards for changes that might not be pushed to the app yet. You're listening to announcements that are half audible and often incomplete. You're checking your phone repeatedly, not because anything changed, but because it might. You start scanning the environment for signals. Is that group lining up for boarding, or are they just clustering? Did the gate agent say something important, or was that for another flight? Is the delay real, or just temporary? None of this is written down clearly, so you read the room instead. You haven't gone anywhere yet, but your attention is fully engaged. The airport isn't something you pass through anymore. It's something you manage. From the moment you step inside, you're not just moving toward a gate. You're supervising a process that can change without warning, and that constant awareness is what begins to wear you down. You're not relaxed. You're alert. There's a difference, and your body knows it immediately. You're sitting, but you're not resting. You're standing, but you're not idle. You're supervising the waiting itself. Is this the right line, or just a crowd forming out of habit? Is that group boarding early, or are they confused? Did the gate change quietly while you were looking down at your phone? Is the app delayed, or is the screen delayed? You're constantly reconciling information that should agree, but often doesn't. Even when everything lines up, you keep checking. Not because you're anxious, but because experience has trained you to. You've seen how quickly things can change without announcement or explanation. You know that the cost of missing a shift is higher than the cost of staying alert. So you hover in that half-aware state, ready to act but never fully at ease. Waiting used to be passive, now it's active, and that constant readiness is exhausting in ways most people don't realize until they feel it. That constant vigilance is the work nobody talks about. It isn't heavy lifting or sprinting between gates, it's sustained attention. And sustained attention is exhausting, especially in environments designed to overload your senses. Airports are louder now, brighter, more crowded, more visually aggressive. Screens flash promotions, warnings, and updates that may or may not apply to you. Announcements echo with just enough information to raise questions, but not enough to settle them. People cluster suddenly, and you're left guessing whether it's meaningful or just confusion spreading. Your brain is filtering constantly. What matters? What doesn't? What changed? What might change next? That filtering never stops because missing the wrong signal has consequences. The environment demands interpretation, not just presence. None of this feels like doing something, but your mental energy drains all the same. By the time you board, you may already feel worn down, not from effort, but from awareness. The work was invisible, but the fatigue is real. Your brain has to sort signal from noise continuously, and the noise is relentless. Screens update constantly, announcements overlap, conversations bleed into each other. Somewhere in that stream is information that actually matters to you, and missing it feels costly, so you don't risk it. You err on the side of over-attention. You listen to announcements that don't apply. You watch movements that might mean nothing. You keep one ear open even when you're trying to rest. The assumption settles in quietly. If something goes wrong, it will be because you missed a cue you should have caught. That belief changes how you behave. You stay mentally upright. You don't fully disengage. You monitor instead of relax, because relaxing feels risky. The system doesn't reassure you that you'll be told what you need to know, so you take responsibility for knowing everything. This isn't anxiety, it's learned behavior. It's what happens when the cost of missing information feels higher than the cost of paying attention all the time. The result is a tired mind long before the journey is over. That's a heavy burden to carry through a day, and the most surprising part is how early the fatigue sets in. You can feel it before boarding even begins. Not because anything is hard, but because everything requires just a little bit of effort, all the time. Standing in line isn't passive anymore. You're tracking your place, watching boarding groups, assessing overhead bin availability, and reading the gate agent's behavior for signals about how strict or flexible the process will be. Sitting at the gate isn't rest either. You're scanning screens, listening for announcements, and watching the crowd for movement that might matter. Even once you're on the plane, the work doesn't stop. You're anticipating the next step. Will the bins fill? Will there be a delay? Will the connection hold? None of this is strenuous on its own, but layered together, it drains you early. That's why the tiredness feels disproportionate. You haven't traveled far yet. You've just been working quietly the entire time. You're never fully off duty. Somewhere along the way, travel stopped being something you moved through and became something you managed. That realization doesn't arrive as anger or frustration. It arrives as a quiet, unsettling question. When did this become my responsibility? No one announced the change. The system didn't hold a meeting or send a memo. Expectations just shifted gradually. More self-service replaced guidance. More choices appeared, each carrying hidden risk. More decisions were pushed onto the passenger and labeled as flexibility. Flexibility sounds empowering, but it often means you're navigating ambiguity alone. You're expected to interpret rules, anticipate outcomes, and make the right call without full information or backup. If it goes wrong, the system assumes you accepted the trade-off. That constant ambiguity is exhausting. Not because it's dramatic, but because it never resolves. You stay mentally engaged the entire time, managing uncertainty instead of being carried by the process. That's the work nobody prepared you for, and why travel feels heavier than it used to. Here's the part that really clicked for me. The work of travel isn't evenly distributed. Some people barely notice it. Others feel it immediately. And it's not about intelligence, experience, or how often you fly. It's about how much margin you have for uncertainty. When you have flexible time, low stakes, and room for things to go sideways, the system's friction barely registers. A delay is annoying, not consequential. A gate change is inconvenient, not destabilizing. But when your schedule is tight, your commitments matter, or your tolerance for disruption is already stretched, every unknown carries weight. Each decision matters more. Each change costs more energy. That's where the work compounds. You're not just reacting to events, you're protecting outcomes. You're preventing knock-on effects that could ripple into work, family, or obligations waiting on the other end. That's why two people can take the same flight and walk away with completely different impressions. One shrugs it off, the other feels drained. The difference isn't the trip. It's how much invisible work each person had to do to keep it from unraveling. When you travel now, do you feel like you're managing the process more than you used to? Or does it still feel mostly automatic to you? We'd love to hear how it feels on your end, so drop your thoughts in the comments. We read them all and may give you a shout out during a future video. One of the most frustrating parts of this shift is how easy it is to misread. People turn it inward. They assume they're less patient, less adaptable, less resilient than they used to be. They think the problem is personal, a quiet failure to keep up. But when you step back, the pattern is obvious. The system didn't get harder because travelers changed. It got harder because complexity was offloaded onto the passenger. Airlines didn't do this out of malice. They did it to optimize operations, reduce costs, and scale efficiently. But efficiency for the system often translates into more effort for the user. What staff once handled is now pushed to apps. What was clearly explained is now implied. What was standardized is now variable by fare, route, aircraft, and timing. That variability is the work. It forces interpretation, judgment, and constant adjustment. And because it's invisible, people mistake it for personal decline. In reality, the environment changed, the expectations shifted, and the extra effort you feel is the cost of carrying complexity that used to belong to the system. Every variable requires attention. Every decision costs a little energy. And when you stack dozens of them into a single day, the total adds up fast. By the time you land, you haven't just traveled from one place to another, you've managed the process end to end. You monitored timing, you adjusted the changes, you made decisions with incomplete information, you stayed alert for hours in an environment that rewards speed, not clarity, and then you arrived. The system treats that arrival as the only metric that matters. There's no acknowledgement of the work it took to get there. No recognition that you anticipated problems, avoided mistakes, or adapted when things shifted. From the outside, it looks like everything went fine. That's why the fatigue feels confusing. You ask yourself why you're so tired when nothing went wrong. The answer is simple but rarely named. The work was real, even if it wasn't visible. You didn't just sit on a plane, you carried the trip the whole way through. Because fine now requires effort. Once I saw it that way, my relationship with travel shifted. Not because I found a trick or a shortcut, but because I stopped expecting the experience to carry me automatically. I accepted that modern travel isn't passive anymore, and treating it like it is only creates frustration. I started pacing myself differently. I stopped trying to optimize every minute or stay constantly ahead of the system. I let myself move slower when I could. I stopped treating mental fatigue as a personal failure and started treating it as part of the cost of the day. Some parts of travel now require focus. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're responding realistically to an environment that asks more of you than it used to. When you understand that, the tiredness makes sense. Modern travel isn't broken, it's demanding. And the demand isn't physical, it's cognitive. That distinction matters because once you recognize it, you stop fighting the feeling and start managing your energy instead. Once you recognize what's actually happening, you start making different choices. You decide where to pay attention and where to let things go. You stop trying to monitor everything equally because you realize not everything deserves the same energy. Some details matter, many don't. Learning the difference becomes part of traveling well. You also stop assuming you did something wrong every time you feel tired. Fatigue stops being evidence of failure and starts being information. It tells you that effort was spent, decisions were made, and attention was carried for hours in an environment that demands it constantly. Most importantly, you begin to recognize the work for what it is. Even if no one labeled it, even if the system pretends it doesn't exist, you stayed alert, you adapted, you managed uncertainty. That counts. Once you name that effort, it loses some of its sting. You're no longer confused by the exhaustion. You expect it. And when you expect it, you can plan around it instead of fighting it. That awareness doesn't make travel effortless, but it makes it more humane. If this resonates with you, if you've ever finished a smooth trip and wondered why it still drained you, then you're not imagining things. You're responding appropriately to a system that quietly asks more of you than it used to. If you want more Passport Pointers videos that unpack these unspoken parts of travel and put words to experiences a lot of people feel but can't quite explain, watch the next video that's popping up on your screen right now. Thanks for watching Passport Pointers, and I'll see you in the next video.